All right, today we're tackling one of history's greatest and most tragic stories, the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria. At least, that's the story we think we know.
Yeah, you've probably heard some version of this, right? The idea that one single, terrible event, one catastrophic fire, destroyed all the knowledge of the ancient world and basically slammed the brakes on human progress for 1,000 years.
And it's a powerful story. I mean, it paints this incredible picture of a grand bonfire of wisdom, a moment where reason was literally snuffed out by ignorance, changing our destiny forever.
So, let's start there, with the legend. The idea of this perfect universe of knowledge, this golden age of wisdom, all tragically lost in the flames.
But here's the thing. When you actually start to dig into the real history, a much more complicated and, frankly, a way more interesting story starts to take shape.
So let's do that. Let's unravel this legend piece by piece and see what the facts really tell us.
Okay, first things first, let's just talk about the numbers. We hear this huge figure, 700,000 scrolls, but that's almost certainly a wild exaggeration. When archaeologists look at the ruins of other massive ancient libraries, a much more realistic number for Alexandria is probably somewhere around 40, maybe 50,000 scrolls. Now don't get me wrong, that is still huge for the ancient world, the biggest collection, for sure. But it wasn't the sum of all human knowledge.
And this is probably the single biggest mythbuster of all. There wasn't one big fire. The library didn't die in a single dramatic blaze. It was more like a slow, painful death over centuries. It took a hit during Julius Caesar's civil war. Later, its funding got cut off by an angry emperor. The whole district it was in got trashed in battles multiple times. It was death by 1,000 cuts, not one knockout punch.
And another thing we really have to get our heads around is that all of the ancient world's knowledge wasn't just sitting in one building. I mean, Alexandria was amazing, no doubt, but it wasn't the only game in town. You had other great libraries in places like Pergamon and Rome. It's better to think of ancient knowledge not as a single hard drive that could be wiped, but more like a distributed network.
So this brings us to the next big question. What was actually on those scrolls that got lost? Because what we think was lost is often just as mythologized as how it was lost.
We have this idea that the library must have been full of blueprints for modern technology, but that really misunderstands what Greek science was all about. It was what you might call proto-science. It was based on pure logic and philosophy, not on experiments and measurement like we do today.
So yeah, they talked about atoms, but it was a philosophical thought experiment. It wasn't like they said, okay, let's build a particle accelerator and test this. See, there was a huge social divide between the philosophers doing the thinking and the engineers and slaves who actually, built stuff. Oh, and everyone loves to bring up Hero's steam engine, but we gotta be real about what it was. It was a neat little gadget, a toy basically, a cool party trick that could spin itself. It couldn't do any real work. They just didn't have the materials, the precision tools, or even the math to kickstart an industrial revolution.
So if finding some forgotten scroll in a library wasn't the secret to progress, then what is? Well, history shows us a very different and much messier path to innovation.
Think about it. Major breakthroughs almost never come from a single blueprint. Look at the atomic bomb. That didn't start because someone wanted to build a weapon. It started with Einstein being curious about why pollen grains jiggle in water. That led to decades of people just being curious about atoms, with no specific goal in mind. It was only after all that basic research was done that scientists could turn around and apply it to a single, urgent project during a war.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. The guy who ran America's entire scientific effort in World War II, Vannevar Bush, he said it himself. He said that all those amazing wartime inventions, radar, the computer, the bomb, they were only possible because of that huge backlog of basic, curiosity-driven science they had built up for years.
So when you put it all together, the real tragedy of Alexandria isn't some big, dramatic fire. It's about a slow, quiet decay. And it's a problem that should feel surprisingly familiar to us today.
The real enemy wasn't an army with torches. It was just time. Those papyrus scrolls were incredibly fragile. They would crumble, they would rot. The information was literally turning to dust faster than scribes could copy it all over to expensive, but much tougher, animal skin parchment.
And if you think this is just some ancient problem, think again. I mean, seriously, if you have any old VHS tapes or audio cassettes from just a few decades ago, there's a really good chance they're unplayable now. The physical medium itself has just decayed. The information is lost. It's a constant fight.
And today, of course, we have our own digital version of this. We call it link rot.
You click a link you saved a few years ago for an important source and poof, 404 not found. The page just gone. Our amazing global digital library is way more fragile than we like to think.
And that leaves us with the pretty powerful thought, doesn't it? The story of Alexandria isn't really just about the past. It's a warning for us right now. As we build the biggest library in human history online, we have to ask ourselves, are we sure we're not just building a newer, more fragile version of Alexandria, one that's just as vulnerable to the slow decay of time?